YouTube, Mark Kaufman here, and today I am finally doing the Schrade Imperial Century video. Now, the reason why it's taken so long to get to this video was, one, I wanted to accumulate a few different models to compare with a few Victorinoxes that I have, and I was doing quite a bit of research to prepare for this video. So really quick, let's get into some of Schrade's history. So Schrade Knives began in 1904 as the Schrade Cutlery Company, founded in Walden, New York. Another knife company, the Imperial Knife Company, was founded in Providence, Rhode Island in 1916. In 1941, Albert M. Bear purchased the Ulster Knife Company, merging it with the Imperial Knife Company to form the Imperial Knife Associated Companies. Now later in 1946, Schrade Cutlery was sold to Imperial Knife Associated Companies, and the conglomerate was renamed the Schrade Walden Cutlery Co. Incorporated. Now in 1983, Albert M. Bear took the company private to avoid a hostile takeover and renamed the company Imperial Schrade Company in 1985. In 2004, Schrade Corporation was bought by Taylor Brands, LLC, and then in 2016, the company was purchased by firearms maker Smith & Wesson in July of 2016. Now let's bounce back to the 1980s really quick. In 1980, Albert M. Bear decided to market a knife that would compete directly with Victorinox. The first two knives were small multi-tool knives which were given the name Captain and the model DL2R, both of which were made in the USA. The Captain series appeared in Schrade catalogs from 1987 until 1990 and did not last long. Being manufactured in the US, the cost to make them outweighed the overall sales of the knives, and they were later discontinued. Bear, still driven to create the Schrade Swiss Army knife, decided to use Schrade's facility in Germany. These parts would be sent to Ellenville, New York for final assembly. This was a short-lived beginning of the Schrade Century series of knives. After less than a decade of production, the Century series was discontinued in 1999. Now, really quick, I actually have a little bit of information on the manufacturer of these knives. So these knives here were manufactured by Aldermesser in Leibruck, Germany. Now, before German reunification, Alder was known as GML, and Victorinox discreetly supplied them with stamped parts, which were assembled by the German brand Foron. Now, let's jump to 2010, and Mekoff Knife Company acquired the remaining stamped parts, and they are still using some of those parts today. So a lot of these parts that you see on these knives were stamped, but finally finished by the Aldermesser company. Okay, so a lot of these parts were using the stamp masters of Victorinox parts. Now, that is not to be said that all of these were Victorinox parts. Some of these were actually Alder's own creations, like the saws, and then the scissors, and then some of the different blades here. Now, some of the tools were also different, like the nail file, and I will have to say these are very, very close knives. Now, these knives here are all made in Germany except for one. Now, this one here is actually going to be the DL-2. Now, this is the one that was made in the USA, and I have to say it is pretty impressive, but it's crude. It's not as finely finished as a Victorinox, but I have to say the effort was definitely made in this knife. Now, you can see here that it has two, I guess, layers to the outer covering here. This is actually kind of a resin polymer with the shield on the underside of the polymer there. And this knife actually compares very closely to Victorinox's Classic. Now, this one here is actually a Classic SD, but what you can see here is it is very similar in size. Very similar in size. However, this knife actually uses Wenger's style of scissors with the cam system. Now, I will say this, the scissors on this is actually pretty poor. So let me close this here, and let's take a look at these scissors. These scissors are very crude. The blades on them are actually very short. Since it is very close to the Victorinox in size, we will check and see how they differ. Now you can definitely see that the Victorinox scissor blade is much longer than the Schrade's, and the Schrade's scissors are not as smooth even as the Wenger. I mean, the cam system works very well. It's effective, but the spring tension on this knife is so weak that if you were cutting like this, you can get gummed up. Now, if you're cutting like this, you're pushing down against the spring, and this is probably the best way to use this one. Now, really quick, let's compare the size. Now, the size of this one is actually very, very, very close to the Victorinox one. So let me see if I can get it right there. So it's actually 58.8 millimeters, whereas Victorinox has a measurement of 58.25 or 58.23, depending on what you're doing there. But this was a very good effort, but I have to say, this thing is heavy. This thing is very heavy compared to the Victorinox, and that has to do with the two sides here. Now, this was a good first attempt, and they had to stop production, like I said, because these were just so expensive. These cost quite a bit of money back in the day, and personally, I don't think the quality was really there. You can see here that the nail file is actually off-center, and everything else on that looks fine, but it's off-center there. Then, when it comes to the blade's fine. I don't think there's any issues with the blade, but it's very thin, and you can actually see that this one has been bent. So this one here does bend, but so does the Victorinox model. Now, each one of these here actually were given very interesting names. Most of them had to do with like stars or supernovas or anything like that. And so what we have here is the Apollo, we have the Gemini, then we have the Omega, then we have a Pulsar, then we have a Steward, an Endeavor, and then the Star. And these models all were made in Germany. And I have to say, this was a very interesting and very competent second attempt at these knives. Now, let me see, which one do I want to start with? Let's start with this one here, since I've been talking about the classic and comparing those. Now, this Star actually mimics the size of the Wenger Esquire more so. Now, they ended up going with the Victorinox sized scissors, not sized, but style scissors, but they went with the size of the Wenger, which is going to be a 65 millimeter size. And let's just really quick see if this is actually going to be 65 millimeters. And it's actually 63, so it's a little smaller. But what I have to say is this: all of these tools are very, very close in function and in quality to a Victorinox. Now, the construction, though, is very different. The scales do latch on to the pivots, and not the pivots, the rivets, and it's interesting to see how they actually connect to the knife. Now, when it comes to the spring action, these knives, all of them, have about the same spring action as a Victorinox. If you gave me one of these and I was blindfolded, I would be very hard-pressed to see which one is which, given some of these have kind of dead giveaways on which one is what. Like, if I had this one, I would know this is not a Victorinox all. But if you gave me this one or even this one, I would probably be thinking I'm holding a Victorinox. Now the other difference, and I guess a cheaper way of doing it, is they went with this style of tweezer, and the tweezers were just one single piece of metal. And the real downside to this style of tweezer was that it was, first of all, weak. Okay, you can't put a lot of pressure behind that. But what ended up happening a lot with these knives is that this is sticking up so high that you could just lose it in your pocket or even on your keys, and it'd probably even slip out. Now, when it came to the toothpick is okay, but you can even see that this toothpick is pretty inexpensive compared to the Victorinox toothpicks. Now, the other thing that is interesting is that the scale itself goes up a little further than the frame, and then your toothpick and tweezer actually fill in the empty space here. So if you actually lost these two tools, you would have that big empty void there, and that does not look very good. So that one was the Star. Okay, now really quick, I'm going to go to this one here because I find this one to be very interesting. This one here is a earlier iteration of the Century series, and it actually has a gold star with a shield. And what I think was that this was being done in the early 80s, and when Victorinox stopped using the nickel silver shields, then they had to switch over to a silver shield. So this is an older Victorinox Spartan, and it has the nickel silver shield, which has kind of a gold tinge to it. Now you can see the similarity in this one because it has that gold tinge. Now this is not nickel silver. I think this is some kind of plated metal, but I will say this, the fit and finish of these knives is very competent. Very, very well done, very well fitted. And you can see here that the tools almost look exactly the same. Now here I have a camper, a Victorinox camper, and you can see that the teeth on the saws are practically the same distance. There's a very small difference in the teeth pattern there, but you can see here even the can openers are practically the same, and they practically measure the same as well. So the can opener here is 2 millimeters thick for the, and this was the Gemini, and this one is 1.97. So it's a little thicker, which is a little surprising, but it's not by much. Now, when it came to the blades on these are, again, practically the same. I'm going to flip this over so we can actually just take a look at the blades really quick. Now, I set all these up so you could see the tool selections that they had, but also so I don't just cut myself opening all of them. Now you can see there that the blades are practically the same. There's just a little bit more belly on the Schrade, but I mean, it's so similar. The spear point blade actually has a little more of a rounded tip on it, and the Victorinoxes have a sharper tip. But when it came to these knives, these things were built very, very well. They even had the keyring attachment, a nickel silver attachment for the keyring. Now the keyrings, they actually went with a larger size. Now the Victorinox keyring is going to measure, let me measure that really quick. The Victorinox keyring is going to be measured at 12 millimeters, okay? And Schrade went with a larger keyring, and I'm trying not to cut myself here. And they went with 14.5 millimeters. Now, is there a benefit to having the larger keyring? I think so. Personally, I think if you needed to use the keyring for keys or handing off a key to attach to somebody else's keyring, you could take that off and it's a little bit bigger. You could put 2 or 3 keys in that. Now, this one here is really interesting. This is the Endeavor, and this is very reminiscent of a model Victorinox created for Radio Shack, and that one actually had an electrician blade here. Now, I think that one was called the Electrician's Apprentice or the Apprentice. It was a very short-lived model, but it was essentially going to be like this, and it had the Phillips in the back. Now, Schrade went with the 91mm frame, which I actually really quickly want to just double check that these are 91mm. And it is, yeah, 91mm frames, so exactly the same size. But the one that Victorinox created was going with the 84mm frame. So another thing that you may notice is it has the combo tool. Now, Schrade's is a little bit different than the Victorinox one, and these tools actually had a change in the 80s, okay? Originally, these tools looked like this tool. It didn't have the sharp point that they now have, and now you can actually use this point here for a Phillips head screwdriver, and this would only be used for a flathead. But this was the original combination tool, and it was invented in the early 80s, and then it switched over. So Schrade went with the iteration that was the later model, and I think it's a more useful tool. Now, I will say this, it is very thin. The Victorinox one is going to actually be 1.5mm thick, whereas Schrade went with 1.36. It's a little bit thinner, and it's not going to be as robust. Now, one of the things I like about this is it's going to be compact. It's going to be a full-size knife because it's 91mm and you still have the Phillips head. Now, when it comes to the Phillips head, I've actually measured these, and they're very, very close to the Victorinox models. So they do have a slight difference in the shape, though. The Victorinox is going to be a little more refined, a little sharper, but the Schrade still does a good job holding up against the Victorinox ones. Now, when it comes to the more complicated model, the Apollo, I think this is a very good knife, and if I wasn't given a Victorinox and I was given this, I would actually be very happy with it. Now, let's listen to the snap here. The snap on this is very good. We have very good closing, and one of the things I really am impressed with is their attempt at the Victorinox of Scissors. The scissors here are very good. They're built very well, but you can see here that they actually riveted the opposite side of the screw. So you couldn't tighten this or correct it in any way, but you can use Victorinox springs in these. So if you did find one of these, the springs are actually interchangeable. The saw, I've already shown you, but the saw is still, again, a very good saw. It has some differences, but one of the things I was very happy to see is Schrade copied Victorinox to a T. The teeth are actually wider than the top of the saw, and this saw does a fantastic job cutting through wood, exactly like the Victorinox. Now, when it came to the box, I was able to get one of these new old stock, and the box here actually was a little bit bigger than what Victorinox was offering at the time. Now, at this time, Victorinox was offering this style box, and you can see that it's a little bit smaller. It's going to take up less space, but this one here is a little bit bigger, and you can see here hand-honed stainless steel blades, solid brass pins and rivets, limited lifetime warranty, and made in Germany, finished in the US. Now, when it came to these knives, what they mean by finished in the US, these were all assembled in Germany, okay? The only real thing that was assembled in the US was the shields were put onto the knives, and the toothpicks were put into the knives, toothpick and tweezers were put in the knives, and then they were just packaged and then shipped out. So really, when it came to the final assembly, it was very minimal, and the saying assembled in the USA is kind of misleading. Most of all that work was done in Germany. Now, these knives I am actually very, very happy with. There's a reason why I ended up grabbing so many of these, and you can get these for not a lot of money. I paid, I think, like $13 for this one. I got this one in a knife lot. I got this one by mistake, to be honest. I thought it was going to be a Spartan, and it was going to be one that I would carry, but it ended up having a saw. And that happens a lot with even Victorinox campers or hikers, is that people think this is going to be a liner, because when you actually have the knife all closed up, try not to cut myself. When you have the knife all closed up, the saw actually looks like a liner. And people really don't know that you access the saw through the tip of the end there. So that was a nice little grab. All in all, this was a very interesting line of knives. Would I say grab one, pick one up? It's up to you, really. I really feel like these knives were built to compete with Victorinox, and they were built very well. These knives here probably, I would say, can go toe-to-toe with Victorinox. Now, when it came to the build quality and the final finishing, I don't think so. They just don't have the final inspection quality that I would say a Victorinox would have. But I do think they have a very interesting line of knives, and they had different colored scales in the catalog photo I showed you. These have different scales. You could get blue, you could get yellow, green, black, red, and they had a lot of options. The thing is these were a very short-lived line of knives, and I think it's a shame, but also I'm really happy Victorinox came on top, because this was a knife that I just don't think would have lasted either way. Victorinox's quality, all in all, is probably the best in the business when it comes to overall QC and overall quality. These knives came very close, and it was a very, very great attempt at trying to get a piece of that cake, trying to get a piece of what Victorinox was doing at the time. But I just feel that people were willing to either just buy the really cheap Imperial knives that you would take camping, or they would be willing to get a Wenger or a Victorinox. And these here just were not as recognizable as the Victorinox or Wenger. So these knives here were a lot of fun to find, a lot of fun to see the different iterations. I mean, this one here is essentially a Spartan, but it doesn't have the awl. It doesn't have an awl on the back, and you know what? They took into consideration, maybe you don't want the awl, maybe you just want the corkscrew, then we've built that for you. Maybe you want to have essentially a wader, but you want these two types of tools, the knife blade and then the combination tool, but you want to have the 3D Phillips. And this one here is actually one that I've been very tempted to carry because it is so compact. You still get the Phillips screwdriver, you get the combination tool, you get the main blade, and you still get this really nice large knife that's 91 millimeters, but still very thin. I really do think these are something that you should probably think about when it comes to getting a knife. It's not going to be the same as a Victorinox, but I think that they had made a few models that were very interesting and very competitive with what Victorinox was putting out. Now, granted, the toothpick and tweezers are nothing special, but the construction of these knives were very good. And I would have to say that if you wanted to try and collect some of these, it makes a great history piece. It's a great attempt at creating something that competes with something else in the market. We see that all the time today, and these knives here were doing it back in the 80s and 90s. Now, I have to say this. This took me a long time to find this information, and a lot of it was given to me through a few blogs, a few websites, and then a few individuals. And I have to say thank you guys so much for helping me get the information I needed for this video. So you know who you are out there. You really were a great help to me in getting all this information and some of these photographs, because some of these photographs were really hard to pin down. Now, when it came to camp knives, these definitely were not Schrade's first attempt. Schrade's been making camp style knives since the early 1900s and even late 1800s. So when it came to making these, I'm quite sure they were able to do it, and they did a really good job. Now, thank you guys so much. I know this was a long video, but this was definitely something I wanted to cover and really do my due diligence on, because I felt like these knives were really something interesting in the knife world. So if you guys enjoyed this video and my little history lesson on the company, let me know. And if you have one of these knives, let me know which model you have. I did put a picture of the catalog and all the listings and names, so you would be able to at least figure out which one you have if you have one. So thank you guys again for joining me on my YouTube channel, and this was definitely a labor of love for me. I really wanted to dive into the company and dive into this knife model. Now, these knives are all probably not going to be used by me. These are probably all going to go into a roll, and I'm just going to enjoy them and keep them as kind of a reminder of what brands can do when they really try to compete with one another. So till the next one, I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.